everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and get started, and no worries if people are still trickling in. First off, I just want to thank everyone for being here on the last side session of UNC and all looking relatively bright-eyed after lunch. We're going to try and get folks moving around and having some discussions, so hopefully that will take away any sleepiness that people are feeling. But we are going to be presenting on some findings from the Remote Drinking Water Quality Monitoring Technical Working Group. So whether you are already a part of our technical working group, new to the technical working group, or came in here by accident, we're really excited to have you, so you can offer some different feedback and insight into the research we're conducting. So for folks who do not know me or maybe only know me from my Teams icon, my name is Becca. I work at PATH helping to support our WASH portfolio, and PATH along with Cova and Mangrove Water serve as the co-secretariats and the project management team of this technical working group. And we just did want to quickly acknowledge that this work is made possible by the Hilton Foundation through their funding, so we want to express a thank you for that. All right. And I think everyone has seen the handouts floating around. Thank you, Adam, for handing those out. But just to make sure that we are having an interactive session, we are going to be using Mentimeter. So this works pretty similar to almost every other feedback app kind of thing that we've been using throughout the session. You don't have to download anything. You can either scan the QR code right there, or at the top you'll see you can join at menti.com and use code 344167753. I'm not going to repeat that, but it'll be on the slides a lot, so you'll know what to do. And you'll see the first question is just to help us get a gauge of who all is in the room with us today. So talking about what organizations you work for, where you're based, your name if you want to include that, and then the rest of the slides will be very feedback oriented. The Menti you'll be able to click through kind of at your own pace. It'll make a lot more sense if you wait for us to cue you though. So we'll let you know when we'll be using the Mentimeter. And then just for the structure of this side session, we're going to be doing a pretty brief introduction to the technical working group and the research agenda at a high level. And then we'll be presenting some case studies and doing a deeper dive on the research themes. And then we'll have an opportunity to go into these breakout groups based around those thematic areas and have some discussions and provide some feedback. And then we'll all come back together to do a readout and talk about next steps for the research agenda. Okay. So starting with what our technical working group actually is, it was born out of a larger community of practice on decentralized chlorine use. And out of that, we narrowed the focus to a technical working group on remote drinking water quality monitoring, which allows us to have some more concentrated conversations, as well as kind of narrow the focus to make some research a little bit more actionable. And since launching just earlier this year, we've already grown to 70 members in more than 15 countries with representation from 40 different organizations. And this is great because we have folks from academia, NGOs, industry, and government, which leads to really varied and diverse conversations during our bi-monthly virtual meetings that we have. And so those can focus on lots of different topics, but generally will fall under the themes of financing, innovation, evidence, capacity building, and policy. And just as kind of a selfish plug, we're always looking for new members. So if you like what you hear in the side session, we'll have some information at the end of this presentation about how to join. So we are guided by three key objectives, and those are improved awareness and technical knowledge. So we want this group to serve as a space to enhance the knowledge base of skills, strategies, and best practices for sensor monitoring. This group also should serve as a platform for organizations to connect and collaborate and share new approaches and discover solutions by working together. And then last but not least, we want to make sure we're extending the findings beyond just this group, so not keeping everything internal and just to us, but sharing out the values and outputs as an avenue to champion sensor-based monitoring and advocate for future implementation. And we aim to achieve these objectives through a couple of different key targets for this year. So first, I've already talked about is the bi-monthly webinars, and the next one is going to be in December. We use these to highlight evidence and resources through different formats such as project spotlights, open discussions, and expert panels, and again, those are within those 5 themes. And then next is the localized support networks. So we do recognize that there's value in having kind of a large group coming together virtually. There's also a lot of value in having people have small groups in person who work in similar contexts to be able to share and expand their technical capacity, as well as have that day-to-day support. And then last but not least, and this is what we're going to be primarily talking about today, is the research agenda. So we are intending to have the first iteration of this published by the end of the year, but it's meant to be a living document. And it is meant to be consensus-based, and it'll be co-authored and endorsed by the technical working group. So we're really glad to have everyone in this room to be part of this iterative process, and I'm actually going to pass it to Megan Lindmark from Mangrove Water, who's going to talk a little bit more about the research agenda.
Thank you for kicking us off here, Becca. Yeah, so just a little bit briefly about the research agenda, and I'm standing between you and some very exciting case studies, so I will keep this really brief. But the primary activity, and the one that we're focused on today, is developing this global research agenda on remote water quality monitoring with sensors. So there's a couple of key activities listed here. First is, conducting a literature review and interviews to better understand what's happening in the sector and what major gaps need to be filled by this agenda, and then identify research questions around each of the key themes, and then produce these opportunities for iterative feedback. So one of those is happening here today, and then we're going to work to publish that final research agenda that Becca already mentioned by the end of the year, and final here in big quotes because it's meant to grow and gain momentum and hopefully additional feedback. So we're focused on these major themes today, so the case studies that you're going to hear momentarily are also focused around those themes. The guiding research question for the research agenda is this, and I'm just going to read it. What evidence gaps and research priorities can advance the use and operational implementation of remote sensors to improve water quality monitoring in drinking water systems across low resource settings? So the primary audience for this is folks like all of you. Service providers, public health officials, regulators, as well as academics creating research. And the idea here is that we can use these findings because they will be relevant to all of these actors, and in order to drive really momentum and develop, go from an agenda to more of like a roadmap, how we actually use and leverage sensors to do the things that we're all in agreement we need to do, which is work towards SDG 6 and safely manage drinking water for all. So over the next 45 minutes, you are going to hear about some very exciting case studies from a variety of folks across the sector. I'm going to introduce all of them here first, and then they're going to go one after another and share with you what their organizations are doing related to sensor-based monitoring. So up first, we will have Wesley Meyer from Cova, and then Tanner Hoffman from the Uganda Water Project, who will both be presenting on some practical field examples from their various implementation contexts. Next, we will have Whitney Knapp from the University of Colorado Boulder and Virridy, who will be talking a little bit about their sensor and some of the costs and financing around that sensor. Next up, Whitney will be followed by Rachel from the Aquaya Institute, and Rachel will be talking a little bit about some of the water quality monitoring work that Aquaya has done in Ghana and Kenya. And then finally, we will have Tess Brody from the Global Water Center, and she will be presenting on some of the work that the Global Water Center is doing, focused on data infrastructure, as well as how we think about the data that's being generated by water quality sensors. So without further ado, I will have Wes go ahead and come up and kick us off.
I'll keep this light. Just a quick background on Cova. So we're a nonprofit social enterprise working on implementing professionalized maintenance services through our circuit rider model. We work in Central America, Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, and we have 6 main components. The last one that we're adding, remote sensing, that are a part of our circuit rider model. So starting with water treatment implementation, or essentially inline chlorination, chlorine distribution, community capacity building, technical assistance, and then on-site water quality monitoring. So checking for free chlorine residual. And this is a very manual and intensive process, and hence why we're looking at remote sensing to help alleviate some of this manual work. We also have in-lab water quality testing, or water quality analysis, and then finally I'm going to be talking about our remote sensing component. Just a quick highlight, kind of the footprint, so working across about 2,700 rural communities. And then throughout the last 15 years of our work, we've noticed that chlorination rates, we can bring chlorination rates up in the community setting to about 74%. And so looking at two aims of our remote sensing, one to alleviate some of the manual collection, as well as the second part to see if we can increase the chlorination rates across our footprint. So a quick thing about our circuit rider model, consists of circuit riders or water technicians that are equipped with a motorcycle, and they cover about 40 to 50 rural communities. They're visiting every single month. They're doing capacity building, helping the community improve operation, setting the proper water tariff, and then doing a water quality check. And so this is done routinely using free chlorine residual. So after we set up a chlorinator in line, then our technicians are doing surprise visits to various parts throughout the community and checking to see if there's a free chlorine residual presence or absence. Then we report that directly to the community. We log it into our M-Water database so we can keep track of this, and then report it back to the government so we can look at statistical trends and kind of bigger picture scale across the region. And you can see over the last 10 years, we've collected over 22,000 data points on just chlorine monitoring across 42,000 community visits. So very labor intensive, very valuable to have that community in-person visit, but also a lot of visits, a lot of gas, a lot of motorcycle visits within the community. So as a result, in collaboration with Megan, we created an idea around creating a sensor-based monitoring program. So essentially looking at setting up a sensor to help us measure free chlorine residual. And we first started by looking on the market and found that there are chlorine sensors, very expensive, $3,000 to $5,000. So looking at a different way to help us measure free chlorine residual. So we have a chlorinator that we would install on top of the tank. And as the chlorinated water flows into the tank, we install sensors where we're using ORP and pH and using them as surrogate measures of free chlorine residual. And so the first part of this is that we set up and measuring the ORP, and you can see here in the red that we have the classified low events of free chlorine residual, and then we went out and sent a technician out to measure and actually ground truth the information. So here the green dashes indicate that there was adequate chlorine, and then the red dashes were there to indicate that, confirm that there wasn't chlorine in the system. So once we got the system calibrated, then we had a second component to that where we wanted to set up an alert. So first measuring if there's chlorine, but more importantly, who are we informing? How are we informing them? And also making sure that the alerts are done properly. So as you can see over this time frame, the two red areas are areas of low free chlorine residual, or no chlorine. And it sent out an alert. So we start off by sending this alert internally to just our technicians, and it says, alert San Jose, the level of chlorine is low, and then an automated message from EOS, formerly known, Cova. And then we sent out a technician who then went and ground truth the information, sent us a WhatsApp, thumbs up, it's working, things are looking pretty good. So we set this up, and then you add a chlorine tablet. We were able to see the ORP level pop up out, and again demonstrating effectiveness of the sensor. So then the second part, we did a quick analysis on both the pre and post text alerts. And what we found was really interesting is that the free chlorine uptime before SMS alerts is about 67% over this period of time. But after the text alerts were sent out to the community leader, not just internally to our technician, but externally to the community leader, we saw free chlorine uptime about 84%. And if you notice the pink or reddish shaded, there were three low chlorine events. The average low event duration is about 69 hours. However, post, you can see that there were actually more events of without chlorine. However, the average low event duration is about 13 and a half hours. So quite a bit more uptime and very interesting results. So again, if you're getting a message by, on your phone that says your water's not safe to drink, the technician then was alerted and went up and actually fixed the system. So quick outcomes or lessons learned. The first thing that we learned, we only set up 5 sensors across Honduras and Nicaragua, but the importance of setting up an O&M plan. We had all sorts of little things happen with ants getting in, concerns that there's maintenance required. We thought it was more of a plug and play and let it go, but really having a maintenance system and actually priorities across our team, who's doing what and how often. Second part, we're learning just about power management. The first challenge we found is that just over about 2 years, the batteries died because there wasn't enough, even though it was designed right, there's too much clouds, and so making sure we get the power management, also how fast are we sending out the alerts and actually checking, and protection components falling under that. But leaving on a positive note, really positive traction. Seeing positive results. The community leaders loved seeing their water quality data in front of them in their on their phone. And ultimately just seeing that there's a need for a larger pilot, and excited to be a part of this technical working group to kind of see where we can share resources and learn from each other's on that. So thank you very much.
Hey everyone, I'm Tanner Hoffman. I'm the Director of Program and Operations with the Ugandan Water Project. In Uganda, we operate a program called Aqua, which is an operation and maintenance service for rural hand pumps and small piped water systems. So my presentation today is looking at this topic of sensors and water quality sensing from an operational perspective. So as an implementer, what am I thinking about? And just as to frame things up to start, we don't have as an organization any direct experience with water quality sensing, but we do have some other experience with sensors, and some of those factors that are relevant there I think are also relevant for the water quality sensors as well. So where do we have experience? So we have experience with sensors on hand pumps, and for these we were primarily looking at volumetric consumption and fetching patterns. So we've got some experience with the sensors there. We also have some experience with sensors or water meters on piped water systems. So prepaid kiosks for pipe systems, and also household connections with prepaid water meters. So we have that experience there where we're using it both for digital metering, dispensing, but also payment administration. Like I said, on communal kiosks and also household connections. So that's what we've been using it on, but taking a step back, what was our vision? What were we trying to achieve with our use of sensors? And I would say it was really twofold. The first thing that I'd point to is we were trying to use sensors to trigger some kind of servicing action. So could we identify breakdowns and thereby dispatch technicians as a result? And we were also looking at it as a way to give us some visibility, just to make sure things don't slip through the cracks. We're promising our customers that we're going to respond to breakdowns within 24 hours. We want to make sure that we're catching those breakdowns so that we can respond. And with these systems, for triggering action, there's also that element of integrating it into automated systems for technician dispatch. That was something that we were looking at and exploring as well. And then for the metering and collection side, just that, using it to help us relieve the burden on our field team for doing collections, monitoring, volume consumed, et cetera, and then also as a secondary purpose to give us some information about fetching patterns and when are the peak use times, as that can influence system design and some of the related pieces there. So some of the operational realities though, certainly some of the things that we set out to achieve and set out to kind of bring into the world with that vision, some of it worked well, others didn't work well. And I'll go through some of that through the next few slides. But I would say we had really good success with the kiosks and with the household connections, using the meters or sensors for payment and collections. That's where we had some really good success. Also understanding when those peak fetching times are, and all of that worked really well. On the operational triggers side, I think that's where we had a few more challenges. Certainly some things worked well, but others presented challenges for us along the way, and I'm going to point to 3 of those in particular. And the first thing I'd point to is that transmission speed matters for operators. So we were actually finding, despite the fact that the sensors that we were using could identify breakdowns and send alerts to us, we were actually getting breakdown reports from the communities faster than we were actually getting it from the sensors. And that's because we stick our phone number right there. And the community knows, they know when there's a breakdown, they know when water's not flowing because they can't fetch when they get to the hand pump. And they would call us immediately, and we would be able to then dispatch our technicians from that hotline faster than we would get the trigger. We would get the trigger a few hours later from the sensor, but our technicians were already being dispatched. So in our experience, we found that kind of this low-tech solution of having a hotline ticket or having a hotline and posting the number that actually was working better than the sensor was based on some of the identification and transmission speeds. I'd also say reliability really matters. So failed sensors and false flags, like that all comes at a cost to service providers. So when we get a false flag or a sensor fails, we got to send a technician out to check in on the equipment or replace the equipment. All of that comes at a cost. So there's the question of how frequent are these problems going to be, and is the benefit of having the sensor, is it really worth that additional cost and potentially hassle? And I would say the other thing is like cost really matters. So enterprises like Aquatrust, we're trying to operate as a financially sustainable business. So we need like any programmatic element or any technology that we integrate into that program, it has to work from a financial standpoint as well. So there's the question of does adding this sensor, does adding this process, does it make business sense? Is it gonna add increased value for the customers and or like help us operate more efficiently? So those are some of the considerations that we were really thinking about. But where I want to land the plane is like, what are we excited about? Like what is of interest to me as an implementer and a service provider, and kind of what are we thinking about as we look ahead? And first of all, just point to what Wes talked about with those ORP sensors. So in essence, that's an operational trigger for something that the community is unlikely to report. So when water stops flowing, when there's a breakdown, they're going to tell us, they're going to report that. But when there's a chlorination lapse, they're not necessarily going to know or be motivated to report that. So in that case, a little bit of a lag is actually, it's okay because we don't have another reporting trigger, reporting mechanism. So I think that's really relevant. But then also to link to some of the stuff that I know Tess is going to speak to later on, like finding ways to integrate all this data that we're able to collect and generate through sensors, integrating that into systems that really operationalize things, easier pathways for automatic triggering, and how does that work with other data systems tying things together in perhaps like a single common platform instead of having to manage different data platforms for different sensor types. All those things that make the operation and utilization of that data work better. Like that's of interest and that's exciting as well. So thank you for your time this afternoon, and I'm going to pass along to Whitney, right?
Actually, Megan first, but then me first.
Megan, then
Fine.
Thank you, Tanner, and thank you, Wes, for those great case studies straight from the field. And I just wanted to quickly note that in between each of these case studies, we'll briefly share kind of the summary of the research agenda as it sits today related to the themes of the case studies. So Wes and Tanner just both presented on kind of technologies and innovations in this space. You can scan this QR code to provide reactions to the case studies that hopefully you all have in front of, the research agenda questions you hopefully all have in front of you, and provide feedback and questions to the presenters. I won't read all of this to you because hopefully you have it in front of you, and if you don't, flag me down as I sit back down and I'll take one to you. But broadly speaking, what we've found is that there is a need for technologies to improve the possibility of monitoring, right? Current paradigms in monitoring are quite costly. They take a lot of time. They put a lot of impetus on the field implementer to do a lot of additional work. And the magnitude of data that can be collected can be greatly improved by sensors, which can then result in efficiencies and improvements in service delivery. So we have several kind of research questions identified here to help us better understand what is the right technologies and innovations that can work in this space. So I'll let you read those more in depth on your papers, and next I will let Whitney join us and tell us a little bit more about financing and sensors.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Megan. So as she mentioned, my name is Whitney Knope, and I am a PhD student with the University of Colorado Boulder, as well as an environmental engineer with Virridy. And I'll preface this by saying that my predominant work in this technical working group is focused more around the innovation and developing some technical requirements for microbial and chlorine sensors. But today I'm here to talk more about how we pay for sensor-based monitoring, some suggestions and assessments of financing and funding, as well as potential new metrics and valuation for sensor-based monitoring. So first, looking into Virridy as a company, Virridy is a climate and water tech startup spun out of the Mortensen Center in Global Engineering and Resilience at the University of Colorado Boulder. And the primary focus or original founding idea of Virridy was to develop and support the development of drinking water projects across East Africa that generate carbon credits for financing the projects. And alongside of this, there have been developments in monitoring IoT technologies that are used to assess the effectiveness and improve programmatic approaches to these projects. Namely, we have projects across DRC, Rwanda, Kenya, Madagascar. And so related to this goal of more efficient programmatic monitoring, not only has the company focused on carbon credit generation through programs, but also developing their own technologies to monitor these. The most recent of these is one that I have had the opportunity to develop and support the validation of, which is known as the Loom sensor. So if you've seen potentially my other colleagues and I walking around with this sensor or presenting in some other sessions, the Loom sensor is a fluorescence-based sensor utilizing an amino acid called tryptophan, which is known to be highly correlated to the presence of E. coli in drinking water. And so some of the useful parts of this sensor itself is that it is designed to quantify or categorize E. coli contamination into colony-forming units per 100 milliliters, making these data points more actionable and interpretable by people, as well as it's designed for in situ and remote use as an IoT technology. Furthermore, while it's not inherently cheap, it's significantly lower cost than other similar fluorescence-based sensors. And I'd be happy to answer any other questions about this sensor itself and some of the other validation projects we have going on. But would like to more focus on sensor-based monitoring broadly. And I'm sure many of us that I'm speaking to today are intimately familiar with some of the challenges that Wes had alluded to around monitoring for water supplies, about water quality, especially in rural, hard to reach, or volatile contexts. And so to name a few of these offhand would include travel time for field teams, the cost of consumables, the time it takes to get any data, as well as other security concerns, and the infrequency of data that doesn't provide much programmatic data on improving decision-making and actions around water quality. So up here I have displayed three potential, and while they're, I'll admit, grossly oversimplified versions or approaches to monitoring, want to kind of run through some of these and understand some of the considerations that are involved in sensor-based or any regular monitoring. So this first case we have here is focused on basically very limited or essentially no monitoring. And while this presents typically the cheapest capital and O&M costs, it also provides us very limited data on programmatic control or service delivery transparency and accountability to users and consumers. And this also presents us with very unknown information about water quality and its health impacts on communities. The second of these categories is what I would suggest or describe as the typical status quo, which is infrequent grab sampling. And while this in general has been driven down cost-wise with significant innovation in field testing, it still requires expensive field visits and requiring frequency of traveling, as well as presenting some information on water quality, but typically more for reporting reasons rather than programmatic control, and limiting the idea or actionable information around water quality. As well, it limits the variability or understanding of variability of water quality as this changes with seasons and other considerations. And the final of these proposed monitoring approaches would be with sensor-based monitoring. And while significantly recognizing that sensor-based monitoring can potentially and will likely increase the cost of both purchasing sensors as well as ongoing costs, it is really important to also highlight the use cases of sensor-based monitoring, as it can act as both an early warning indicator and providing more spatially and temporally dense water quality data that allows for higher resolution control and programmatic understanding of approaches. So this proposed approach is aiming to balance between not only upfront costs, but also taking into account some of the benefits that might be incurred with sensor-based monitoring. And so what we've decided to propose as part of the technical working group and some of the other research we're doing is evaluating sensor-based monitoring on its cost effectiveness as it is measured with cost per liter of delivering safe drinking water, rather than exclusively the upfront costs with associated monitoring. So bear with me while I explain this potentially confusing graphic. What we've decided to kind of try and depict here is really focusing in on some of the considerations for sensor-based monitoring, namely those first three, including capital expenses, as well as the other assumptions that we have inherently determined or proposed would be mitigated or improved with sensor-based monitoring. And Tanner alluded to this a little bit, is this is a pretty big assumption, assuming that these data points that we receive from sensor-based monitoring and more frequent data collection will actually result in actions, and that's something that the technical working group as a whole is kind of working towards with, capacity building and other aspects. But so these are sort of predicated on that assumption. So this case A here is defining what might be a regular situation within a program, and then case B is sort of the ultra extreme, trying to kind of get at the point of what this really looks like. And so what we can see here is we have very similar capital expenses and O&M expenses, and what really changes between the two as far as financial costs would be those monitoring costs. And it's the baseline of this is describing what we'd go as like a status quo sort of monitoring, where you still have to send field teams out, purchase consumables, etc. But what really changes between these two is in this enhanced monitoring concept, we have a significant increase in both uptime of the sensors, indicating that sensors assist in the functionality of systems when they break down, as well as an improved microbial pass rate of informing when systems not only are not functioning properly, but also are not delivering safe water. And so what we see down at the bottom here in this final, or second to last row rather, would be the cost per safe liter of drinking water delivered. And as you can see, especially over time, we get significant driving down of cost per liter of drinking water delivered when we have increased monitoring. And so the second case B is just a really extreme version of that, assuming that we might have no monitoring and then are really improved with sensor-based monitoring. So just to run through a couple of the potential applications of this, as Virridy as a company, potentially maybe everyone was lucky enough to see Stivers present in the plenary this morning, and so that program, Drip Fundy, is a collaboration that Virridy works on with the Millennium Water Alliance in Kenya, providing not water quality monitoring just yet, but hopefully in the future, but focusing really on functionality and uptime, and improving that through sensor-enabled monitoring in the semi-arid and arid regions of northern Kenya. Some other applications that we have on a remote water quality monitoring side, maybe in other resource-constrained contexts in high-income countries, we have deployed some of these sensors along both Boulder Creek and our home city of Boulder, as well as along the Seine and the Marne rivers in Paris, to improve water quality monitoring for programmatic and regulatory approaches. And then just to kind of close out with some final future work, these sensors and others like it will hopefully continue to be piloted in really interesting applications. One of those that I'm most looking forward to is applying them in one of our carbon credit earning programs in Rwanda, focused on monitoring source water quality and final water quality as a DMRV technology for carbon generating programs there. As well as a forthcoming publication that I'll have, as I mentioned, more focused on the technical requirements of microbial and chlorine sensors in low resource contexts. So with that, I'll say thank you very much, and looking forward to hearing the rest of the presentations.
Great job. Thank you, Whitney, for sharing all about the cost effectiveness potential that sensors have. Appreciate that. And again, here is a summary of the research agenda related to financing. So I will once again plug the Menti, where you can both ask questions for Whitney as well as respond to the summary that you hopefully have in front of you. You may note up here we have a bag of candy. I'm going to be looking for Menti responses that I'm particularly excited about and handing out candy related to that, so please participate, and you will be rewarded with chocolate. So, financing. A very quick summary because you have this document in front of you, but of course the cost range of sensors is quite broad. You know, Whitney presented on one specific use, the loom, but there are a wide variety of sensors on the market, and we don't really have a good sense of which ones work really well and which ones don't, and which ones are worth that relative cost extent. So we're proposing kind of a landscape analysis of sensors, both related to the costs, but also related to their effectiveness. And then we get into a little bit about the kinds of funding mechanisms that might make it feasible to implement sensors at scale, and driven by some of these costs and cost effectiveness analyses that Whitney mentioned. So I will go ahead and hand things off next to Rachel. Come on up.
Great. Thanks, everybody. It's great to be here today. I'm Rachel Pellets. I'm the Executive Director of Aquaya. And the Aquaya Institute is a nonprofit research and consulting organization focused on WASH research. So I want to talk to you today about a couple of programs that we're doing, particularly in Ghana and Kenya, on piloting novel strategies with small water suppliers to improve water quality. And I do want to note these currently do not involve remote water quality sensing directly, but they really show the potential for how this data can be used. So the first one is on water quality dashboards, and the second is on performance-based incentives. So just to start us off on water quality dashboards. So our team looked at this, we're doing this study, and our hypothesis to start was that better water quality information can lead to improved treatment. I mean, that's why we do testing, right? So that we can improve treatment. And so we currently have a randomized trial ongoing in Kenya and in Ghana, where the approach is that we have an agreement with labs where they're contracted for monthly testing, and so these are existing water quality labs, and they're contracted by small rural water suppliers, so small pipe systems. And then monthly, the groups would meet together to review these testing results and talk about what they mean. And so here on the right is the graph of some of our testing results. I'm sure it's small for folks in the back, but looking at E. coli test results on the top, and then also on the bottom, free chlorine samples. So you can see, you know, roughly half of our samples overall, we had chlorine residuals in this example. And then we also have dashboards. So again, I know the text is super small, but you know, just wanted to give you an overview of what this kind of looks like, where we're able to rank different systems on their chlorine residual. And this is something that the different systems can look at, and so that creates a healthy competition between different suppliers. The other aspect that we have ongoing is performance-based incentives. So this is some work that we're doing also in Ghana. And our hypothesis for this was that performance benchmarking, so performance benchmarking data in particular, can be transformative for small water suppliers, particularly when tied to financial rewards. So also working with small piped systems, we have worked with water operators to co-define KPIs, or key performance indicators. Then we have used M-Water forms to standardize monthly data entry. And then we are going to be having quarterly rewards, such as hardware or cash, to incentivize performance. And what we have found is that data and these dashboards, you know, through these dashboards can be really transformative. So just looking at water quality testing, we found that this has really improved water treatment. So here on the first graph, I don't know if I can trust this, but here, you know, this is through a randomized trial. We really saw huge increases in chlorination. I see Amy's eyebrows going up, which is always exciting. Where, we had like basically none of the systems were chlorinating to start, and then just sharing this data on water quality increased. By the end of the program, we have almost 60% of
systems are reporting chlorinating at least weekly. And then when we look at is the chlorine residual actually, what does that look like? You know, we go from 5% to 41% by the end of the program. So a lot more systems were chlorinating, and we're seeing that residual. So, you know, these dashboards can also be effective springboards for capacity strengthening and peer learning, especially with the rankings. And this is really encouraging for remote water quality sensing. As I said, this did not use remote sensors, but just shows how data can really be transformative in this sector. You know, and if we think about, oh, well, if we didn't need to be within the proximity of labs, we could be doing even expand the program to other more remote areas as well. But I do want to leave you with some words of caution, because I think our sector, I see some nods, which is good. I think our sector gets really excited about technologies, and I think we have all seen different cycles of technologies that we thought were going to be amazing and solve all of our problems. And that usually doesn't happen. So just wanted to note that we have found in-person interactions are still really critical in terms of, you know, data is unlikely to trigger change without regular external support with in-person interactions. So, you know, that data has to be reliable. We have to make sure that the people receiving that data understand what it means. Also, external support in this situation for the dashboards. And then lastly, but probably most important, is the accountability too. So, you know, who is accountable, who are groups accountable to make sure that actions are taken. And so, yeah, in conclusion, the remote sensing can't replace in-person interactions. And then the other thing I want to note too is that we've seen data is often not the only bottleneck for things to change as well. So a separate program that we did, we also did like cash incentives, and we found you know, there's often a lot of other bottlenecks for why people aren't treating their water, aren't testing their water. And so one thing sounds obvious, but I feel like I just need to like highlight this, is that people need to have the decision-making power and the financial ability to act based on that data. So sometimes the people that are getting that data aren't the ones that can do anything about it. So, you know, you have to think about, okay, does this person, are they the right person where they can control? Maybe they need more financial resources, maybe they need more buy-in from leadership, but, you know, looking at that bigger system. And secondly, as we've seen, you know, these remote sensors are expensive too, so we also have to consider, you know, in these contexts with small water suppliers, about the investment in remote sensing. So, you know, does that make sense versus other needs? And also, like, how does that fit into the bigger picture, which, as Whitney presented, and we need to be thinking about that more broadly. So, with that, we also do have some literature that our team has produced more broadly on this topic of data flows and data and decision making, which I have included there at the bottom. And I just wanted to leave you with some lovely photos in our QR code, but also just end on this note, you know, as we've heard, I think there are a lot of opportunities for remote sensors to have more data and have it more efficiently if it's done right. So thank you, everybody.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel. That was super interesting. I really appreciate this picture right here, which is almost like a data graveyard.
Yeah.
And
Oh
so,
yeah.
And so the concern that we don't want to be
I
pushing
actually
ourselves.
took that photo, yeah, at a water supplier. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So great. We've seen. Go to the next slide. So you can see the rhythm here. So for those that maybe just joined, we have the Menti where you can, if you haven't had a handout, maybe raise your hand. We have additional ones because the text is very small. But we have our proposed research questions for which you can give feedback on at the Menti. You can access at the QR code or by typing in the code at the top. So feedback on the research questions, but also if you have specific questions for the presenters. So the slides that Rachel presented on were kind of in this policy and governance theme. And so we saw in the earlier sessions that, yes, indeed, we have some examples of where sensor data has been used effectively. Some may argue with that, but there are definitely examples where it's been piloted, it's been used in some cases effectively, whether as a wholesale means. We've also heard the counterpoint that you have to complement remote sensing data with in-person visits, so that will continue to be necessary. We also talked about, and one of the issues that is raised in the research paper that we're going to be proposing is that the limit of standards in terms of establishing standards for both the data quality, how this data is used, interoperability of data, how do you compare manually captured data that maybe has different resolution with sensor data, et cetera. And then at the end of the day, the models for the use of this in implementing these types of systems, whether it's used only for performance and operational purposes, or whether it's used for more tactical, strategic, or regulatory purposes, those models are nascent or maybe don't exist. And I guess, again, this idea of need for stronger institutional operational frameworks for implementing these technologies. So we are going to go on to the next presenter, Tess Bodie, who's going to talk about both data systems and capacity building. So, over to you.
That's right. Great, yes, my name is Tess Brody. I work with the Global Water Center, and Global Water Center is an organization that we focus on technical assistance and capacity development through collaboration to the rural water sector to see a lot of these things that you've been talking about, the people that have been talking about. We really partner with them to try to help make learning practical and get it making an impact on the ground. I've just loved how all of these presentations have linked together. There's just threads that go through all of them. And so I'm going to talk for a moment about data infrastructure. And I really want to drive home, if you haven't already heard this from every other person that's presented, is this idea that it's not just about the sensor. It's not just about the hardware. Data infrastructure is really about the hardware plus the software plus the human processes that help us make this effective. And so it's that scaffolding, that infrastructure that matters. And so as we're exploring how do we do this, it's really important that we understand some of the complexity of that scaffolding and that structure. And so in the area of sensor-based remote monitoring, we're talking about the actual sensors that are collecting data, chlorine, pH, all those different things, ORP, flow levels, those sensors. The data then has to be transmitted through another piece of technology, whether it's through cellular or satellite or LoRa. There's different technologies that you have to consider in that actual transmission phase. Then you're going into storage. How is that? Where is that being stored? How is it being stored? How is it, what kind of metadata is being tracked with it? How is it being cleaned? All of those things are important to consider in the structure. And then you're moving into analysis. How is that data actually becoming information and being useful and trends being identified? And then visualization. We're talking about sharing this data, getting it into the right format so it can be understood, so that we can get, whether it's a dashboard or a report or an alert, it has to be in the right format. And then finally, we want to talk about action, and we've heard that over and over again, that it's really about how do we get this data to become actionable, and we do that by creating processes that actually enable the right people at the right time to take the right actions, and all of those things need to be considered within this data infrastructure. So taking a step back to really understand why does this data infrastructure, as well as the capacity development that goes along with it, why does it matter? As I said before, data infrastructure holds together the hardware, the software, and the human processes that are needed to make these projects successful. And without the strong data infrastructures, organizations can't keep up with these rapid advancement in technology. We need all of the systems in place to actually see these new, exciting sensors being used effectively. And on top of that, the massive increase in data, just pure data points from a manual reading into telemetry-based data, necessitates the need for improvements in these data structures. And we really believe that building capacity around sustainable data infrastructure systems is essential for scaling sensor-based monitoring. So as Global Water Center, we get to interact with a lot of different different people, from governments to nonprofits, who are trying these things. And so some of the things we're hearing from the sector and from the people that are actually implementing these things, some of the challenges that they're facing are the fact that data systems are so fragmented that you're having to like log into 3 different accounts to try to access something, and nothing's really working together. And so fragmented data systems is a huge challenge. And then on top of that, the lack of interoperability. You know, how do you actually make data flow together into these workflows and actually, you know, work together to see action? Then another challenge that we hear a lot is just the insufficient technical and digital literacy among local staff. You know, we're sometimes bringing very new technology to remote areas, and there's just not that foundational understanding of how do we talk about this? What are the words? What are the different pieces that can actually make this technology be understood and then effectively operated and maintained over time? Then on that note, there's really you know, a limited mechanisms for translating that data into actionable insights. So sometimes the data is just getting stuck, like Rachel showed, in those stacks of papers or in databases, and it's not actually being translated. There aren't the mechanisms in place to translate all of that information into actionable insights. And then the final thing that we heard again from Whitney, thank you for that, is that the high cost of systems is a challenge for implementation and maintenance, but really needing to understand the different cost benefits that come along with these systems. So Global Water Center has been helping pilot a couple projects that I'm just going to share a few key insights that hopefully encourage you to step into this space and to pilot things and to learn together. So we've been piloting a project with our partners Tanner at UWP and some of our friends at Cova around developing an asset management platform called Acetis, and using that to integrate data sources, automate workflows, and generate reports from that. And so throughout this pilot project, we had a lot of challenges, but we also saw a lot of gains where through this process of integrating these different data sources, whether it was manual or sensor-based or all these different things coming together, we saw a lot of time savings happening. We saw over the year that we were running the pilot, we heard about 32 days of just hours being spent sorting and managing data was saved. We saw that the number of water points that these organizations were managing went up, but the time that they were spending to actually organize that and, you know, schedule operations and all of that was going down. So we just saw great efficiencies starting to happen as we took that data and automated it and operationalized it. Now, there was kind of 2 insights that I really want to share about the data visualization. Now, we always hear this, like, we love dashboards, and getting these dashboards can really help communicate the data. But what we really found is the need to have operationally focused dashboards. That, like, KPIs are great, and it's really important to synthesize all the data into those few items. But the real unlock here was about making the system so that it can automatically flag things that are issues. We programmed it so that using colors and all those different things, so that these alerts and these things that are problematic are really brought to the surface. And so that was really something that we learned as being really effective in the way that we were designing the dashboards that were being used. The second thing was that sometimes it's not easy for people in the context that we're working on to actually sign on to a dashboard. That in itself was a barrier to using the data, whether it was poor connectivity or just having the computer and being able to access it all. So what we really found was really helpful was that by creating a really useful spreadsheet and just having it emailed automatically once a week to the implementers, then the data was in their hand. They could use it to plan their week, to know, in this case we're talking about scheduling preventative maintenance and circuit riders. What systems are overdue? Where do they need to focus? Where are they seeing flags come up in the operation or in the finance? And having all of this generated automatically. There was nobody that had to sit there creating these columns or putting on colors or doing anything. That the system generated this automatically, and it was emailed to right into the hands of the people that needed it. So those were lessons that we learned about how do we make data visualization really useful and getting the data into the right people at the right time and in the right way. The second pilot that I want to highlight very briefly is a pilot project with a technology called Cova. We're piloting it with our friends at PATH as well as with Cova. And we heard a little bit from Wes about the ORP sensors that were being used. And so where we've been kind of stepping in to help with this pilot project is to really realize that a lot of this technology is unknown. We don't have somebody that we could call up and say, oh, hey, I heard you're using that sensor. How's it going? You know, what did you pay for it? How did you get there? How did you have train your staff on it? What, you know, protocols were needed to be in place to do that? There's just a lack of that knowledge. And so by running little pilot projects like this, we've actually just been able to collect learnings on, you know, how was it to work with that supplier? How was it to get the equipment shipped to where you needed it to be? What kind of training did you need for your teams? Can we write these protocols together? How are we actually knowing that these systems are installed and working? How was the installation process? You know, what are the things we can learn? So we've been working with these specific, the Ecofy communicators and the Atlas scientific sensors to be able to take those learnings and then share them back with you guys, to be able to kind of start to create that knowledge base amongst us. And to be able to share that learning and really improve opportunities for pilot projects like this. So I'm going to end on this, just a few takeaways from our learnings about designing systems and processes that work for you, and this is really key. So a few thoughts are that build data systems that fit your operational context for connectivity, for capacity, and for scale. Develop knowledge and skills needed for using new technologies. You need to build these things up in your teams. Automate wherever you can. Automate QA, QC to keep data clean and consistent. Deliver insights in the right format, in the right way, whether it might be a report, it might be an SMS text. Find the right way that works for you. And really focus. Ask every single time you're working with data, ask how you're translating this into operational action. And that's everything for me. Thank you very much.
I was reminded by a colleague, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Ryan Schweitzer with Cova. But I think what we're seeing here is a lot of red threads, right? From the first presentation where we saw that one of the key things in terms of getting that quick action was the link to the tech through SMS to the right user, right? And that was something that Rachel brought up as well. It's getting it to the right person, and Tess, I think you encapsulated it well, saying it's the right people in the right time and in the right way, right? So whether that's that SMS, whether it's an email, because not everybody has access to dashboards. So I think that's really crucial. Again, I'm not going to read all this to you because we have the pending document, but what the idea of this is that you log on to the Menti, give your feedback on the proposed research questions, and a lot of these things that which are covered so well by the speakers. So I don't want to go into all the details, but talking about the gaps, this idea in the digital shift, we have to look at our data systems and look at, you know, avoiding that data graveyard, ensuring that the data that we're collecting is used within a system where we can take action on the data in the right time, and that people are empowered both with the financial means, the technical means, and the capacity, which is going to lead us to our other summary slide on the capacity building, right? So the idea that these technologies are implemented in the context of a specific capacity with a specific familiarity to existing processes, right? So we have to look at how do we enhance capacity, and maybe it's not building capacity, but it's really augmenting or enhancing, right? Because there is an existing capacity and existing familiarity. So we have to talk about the new skill sets and whether or not there's readiness. So again, from the Cova example, one of the main challenges was just on this issue of battery, right? And so that's not getting really into the tech, but that's some very small important detail if you're going to switch over that you need to think about. Again, so log on to the Menti, give your feedback on both the data systems and the capacity building, or if you have specific questions for the presenters, now is your time to do so. I'll maybe give you 30 seconds or so, and then we're moving on to the next phase, which is the more exciting part, your feedback and group work. So take your time, we're now giving a moment before we switch over. Yeah. So give it a second here. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, maybe give folks another 30 seconds to respond. And just to clarify something, so if you're not already on the Menti, you can use this code up here to join. And then if you want a digital copy of all of the proposed research questions and summary of findings that we've been presenting on, you can use this QR code right down here.
Sorry.
No worries. Okay, and as folks are wrapping up, we are going to go into our breakout groups pretty shortly. So I promised I would let everyone move. We really want to have a participatory discussion, but maybe if you guys can just sit for one more minute while I explain how this is going to work, and maybe if my facilitators can kind of start staking out a side of the room that they want to be in. And it's going to be a little bit different from what we have on the slide. So instead of having 2 thematic breakout groups that you'll be able to visit, we're just going to do 1 group for 15 minutes so that we can really have a fruitful discussion. And these can be pretty open-ended, no specific answer we're looking for. But a couple of questions just to consider are these 2 right up here. So is there a research question missing from any of the themes that we've presented on? And do you know any case studies or examples that will help us illustrate these themes? So I encourage you, if you have your handouts, to bring those with you to the breakout groups. And then again, the Menti will also be open throughout the rest of the session if you want to put any additional feedback in there. So 15 minutes for a breakout group, and then maybe if I can get my facilitators to kind of wave so you know where you're going. We have the innovation theme, that'll be with Whitney right over here. So maybe you just take that one.
Yeah, right here is perfect.
Great corner. And then financing will be with Megan right over here. And then policy and governance will be with Ryan all the way in the back. And data systems will be with Tess also in the back. And then capacity building will be with Pamela, who's right there. Okay, 15 minutes, please feel free to move.
Perfect.
Oh my God.
I know, but I was like, I feel like I should spread myself out
It was when we were 20 years ago.
Does anybody else miss it?
So I know we have kind of a large group, but if everyone maybe wants to go around real quick and say what their name is and their affiliation or water. So yeah, I'm Whitney. I work for Virridy as a permanent partner, and then for University of Colorado. I'm the engineering coordinator.
I am Will. I work for Cova. We are involved in
Okay, so, maybe I will just.
I'm more interested in sensors like this water, but I'm interested in less
And then we can start studying.
And Rachel tells us that my so I'd like to very interesting.
Maybe to kick us off, I'll pose kind of
Well, we have two questions posted up here. So as I mentioned in the presentation, my work is not really on the financing end. So if you're interested in financing, I'm very for that. So I kind of have been leaning on the innovation front for around the research agenda for both microbial sensors and then also for doing things. So really interesting to hear anything that Mangrove Water so if anyone, the two primary questions here that would love any discussion about or any feedback on are the current research questions that we have, if they're sufficient, if there's things you're missing, any research that I should dive deeper into for the rest of the research group. As well, if we don't make a lot of progress on that, I have very limited copies of this, but I developed also for the paper that I'm writing around this some technical specifications towards what we would propose for developing microbial and chlorine sensors for low resource context. So particularly people who have technical experience, I would love to maybe spend some time with you to like kind of go through and get some feedback on like what we've developed, yeah, thus far. Specifically focused on that for like applications in the field and how that might be different than the WHO requirements for chlorine or anything like that. Absolutely, I would love to ask. Also, apologies, it printed very light and very small, but. Yeah, so there's pretty large consistency between at least like the environmental and mechanical environments and how inside the wetlands. Yes, I actually have a chlorine one here.
So I have a question. Generally, I heard about, chlorine sensors, tryptophan, like fluorescence. They're all different surrogates, really for safety, right? And so there's false negatives and false positives, grades associated with the direct analyte, but also with the actual thing we're trying to measure. So I'm just curious about how you prioritize both how good of a surrogate your analyte is for the actual metric that we're concerned about, and then what the type 1 and type 2 rates are for your analytes.
I can say very little bit about ours. So totally recognize this point of something that I think our research group has been thinking a lot about is using tryptophan as proxy for E. coli for proxy for safety. If you're kind of getting into this proxy for proxy sort of zone, which does make things incredibly challenging. And one thing that our sensor, the Virridy sensor, is focused on doing is not necessarily giving like a direct quantification of something and saying there's 82 polyforming units per 100 mils or something, but really trying to more categorize that into like risk levels that make things a little bit more actual, and absolutely recognizing that there's a lot of inherent error that still exists in both the sensor technology itself and then that as an imperfect surrogate. So we're doing a lot more field testing around that, and in a perfect world, I was asked a question about this similar at World Water Week, like what I think would be like a next step is, this is like I think a really broad hope, but that there could be research going into actual monitoring of like this surrogate TLF as like reflecting health outcomes rather than kind of going down the chain.
So there was a new preprint pretending to her.
It was actually
I don't know which technology they were using, but they found a lot of higher rate.
Yeah, absolutely.
They were using diluted river water. They found lots of errors and I don't know, I didn't read the whole thing, but, yeah.
Just entire pathogens or specific ones?
They were looking at E. coli, using Cova, pressure.
Oh, yeah.
And then they were, I believe they, actually, you know what, they were using some of the infiltration.
Well, we'd be happy to discuss that. That's something I've got really good research, is the error between polymers and then refiltration.
It's on research table, but that just makes me nervous about trying to use a surrogate for cells, more nervous about microbial cell, than something like chlorine that really that was pretty effective. Milligrams per liter. And ORB as a surrogate for chlorine, it's just like, I don't know why you take that extra step less. Like, I'm interested in ORB sensors with wastewater, big time. So it's a lot, is it cheaper, more accurate? Then that's good, like.
I'm not sure accuracy is cheaper.
Okay, gotcha.
And I think from an operational standpoint, we are seeing, how can we, it's an alert, but we're still following up with the whole operation for actual water quality. We can do that quickly, cheaply, and at scale. Because we're trying to scale like, we didn't pay for this, how is it actually to a bigger picture? So for us, our number one criteria is cost. Like, obviously it has to be accurate, but cost. So like, we looked at essentially, we found like $3,000 or $5,000. Other than manual like dosing. So the difference is there's a lot of feeding and feeding. So we thought it was pretty accurate.
But then later on we realized there were issues with the settlement, some manufacturer defects and the country, price. So there were issues.
Yeah. So you mean you take a bunch of parallel measures of actual
There's more the rate pressure,
which was now data monthly,
or even just two more ones like pressure on it, one that the raw are. Then you're good.
they perceive that as you're trying, they consider that intrusive because they didn't understand the composition. So they didn't really understand what
I was surprised no one talked about pressure sensors because I saw a lot of water tanks and they should be providing positive pressure, and that's another good surrogate, and I think that's pretty useful.
Yeah, he's done pressure sensors. We have on the project that I mentioned in northern Kenya. That's somewhat of a similar sensor that does like functionality of which is a surrogate for that, and has seen like really promising results. And I guess one thing I've backtracked on that maybe I didn't make overtly clear is I think at least in the progress we're at with the research with the science now, it's not intended to be direct quantification. It's not intended to be before reporting. It really is an early warning mechanism and risk indicators and stuff that says, okay, now you go send out your field team to get that sort of thing, because again, if you're getting once a month samples, maybe once a year, like our carbon programs are only required to monitor once a year for water quality, which we know it changes.
We actually went part of our, we also had a mixture of that tank level. And then what we did at night, assuming at 3 o'clock in the morning when everybody's got their taps closed, we can see the water level rise. And rather than looking great, estimate source flow. And that's cheaper than naturally.
Probably twice as much. But it's kind of what we passed it. He's actually going to pay for the role. We need 8 cents then. Great to go. Cruising. I don't know. Okay, yeah. So I think like, just in I guess what I was going to say is like yesterday where it's kind of like what's the key things that help us make a sales license. The number one was a decent sensor. And we didn't seem to be, is anyone actually ready to fund it? I'm going to see what the reason is. Everyone to be honest with the cost effectiveness of what they're trying to fund. To pay itself at the beginning. I don't think that's like, because we can Well, depending on cost. Depending on cost. But it would seem like they had quite a lot of skin in the game. I'm just wondering whether
All right, to my facilitators, we have just under 5 minutes left, so just making sure that you're reaching an endpoint in your conversations.
How many can be? We have a really good test case for actually spending gas. Then I don't and we're trying to even if you're to get it, you know, state can be get our compensation at like $300 still, it's a savings to us, but there's nothing that you can replace in human interaction. So even if you could do it on a maybe monthly basis or, you know, frequent, but then we still would need a quarterly visit, there's still that other intervention that's required. And again,
combining a lot
I can see the sense of turning it into a block phone number, plug away, or other ways around it. So we've even struggled trying to figure out who would pay. And the only thing that we've identified, maybe the government, but they're not even, I mean, we're giving them a lot of data, and they're like, okay, cool, put it in back to the field. Maybe NGOs, but again, we're the NGOs line, so they, that's what we found is very expensive, and even then, it's a hard business one for finding investment companies, like cost requirements,
how much balance that's on the meeting. So whenever
Emphasize on the message, does anyone else have an opinion on like what is it, like the vision of what do you want this census to be? Like I think there's a lot of vision, and that's what I was going to bring up. I think it's really worth having a overall conversation about it. But over engineering and like we're actually figuring it out. But like, and it is looking at the requirement, like it's real time. Usually do that. So maybe we should do something to figure out the minimum requirement as a kind of exactly, absolutely. And I guess one thing to emphasize on that, so this is predicated on the NASA technology readiness development. And so the words between shall and may are sort of the distinguishing factors between that. But actually in the first one, it's like real time, how real time is the second, and day is exactly. And I think otherwise, a lot of the other things. Absolutely, absolutely.
Are your notifications going to community members or to the circuit members? Because it seemed to be vague.
We started, we tested internally, make sure we're getting this out, but now they're going directly to the car.
Oh, okay.
So they are going.
And they're on the motorbikes, right?
So our truck riders, our technicians.
Okay, I got you.
Yes, but the
Farmers have to have
the communities.
Oh, they're in the community. Oh, awesome.
These
Oh,
are actually
great.
community operated.
Okay, that's
So
cool.
they're actually going directly to the community.
And then if the community needs to reach out to the circuit riders,
So,
the
yes.
contact is there. And you can just take care of it locally instead of, yeah, because all the transportation, like when I saw the two dudes in the truck, I was like,
No, I just want to make
totally. So that's why we, I mean, ultimately, it's a community job, responsibility to put a form tablet in. And many times they run out of that's where the downtime is. So we just shorten that time, send a reminder. And usually it's like, oh, we do it about once every other day, you know, and so after for the real time.
Yeah.
And we actually tried across the five, tried to put it in communities that always done a good job of it, other ones that have done like 4. And so trying to get a mix of like how. But they, every time the community leader, love it. They love to see real-time data, somewhat real-time data through their phone.
All right, everyone, if I can ask folks to wrap up their conversations, again, if you have any remaining thoughts that you weren't able to get out in the breakout group, or a really great thought that you did get out in the breakout group, I just encourage folks to go to the Menti and make sure that you're putting that in there, because we'll be using all of that feedback to kind of inform our research agenda.
but yeah, absolutely.
And So if I could get my facilitators to start making their way up to the podium for the share out.
That would be pretty good. I would get let's have that. Yeah, that'd be amazing.
And then for all of our participants, if you could start to put the chairs back to where they were. And again, any feedback can go into the mentee.
Because I was just thinking,
I like now.
Yeah, I'll like hear. Yeah.
No, I have to give all my candy. We're having too good of a discussion.
You want to go first? Share some salient thoughts. I love it.
I was very like, a little stingy on
It's like past just the one thing you get like that 30 to 1 minute kind of 30 minutes. Oh, awesome. 30 cut it to 1 minute.
All right, I think once we get all our facilitators up here for the share out, we can go ahead and start. But first off, I'd like to introduce Erin from Cova, who's going to be leading our share out.
Awesome. Thank you everybody for staying so long on a Thursday afternoon nearing the end of the conference. I'd love to have Megan come up and give a brief conclusion of what was discussed in the finance.
Yeah, great. So our group, all of whom earned candy, by the way, did a great job. So we discussed a few pieces that were kind of missing from the agenda as it currently exists, and one of those was considering the willingness of the community members that are being served by whatever service provider are to pay for the services they're receiving, and how that profit can actually be factored into paying for sensor-based monitoring. So this gets at a little bit just like unique mechanisms to consider payment for sensors.
Awesome. Whitney, come on up with innovations.
I just want to say a very big thank you to my group. I'm really excited to take some of this information and push it forward further. Some of the things that we discussed were the challenges around using surrogate parameters and inherent error that kind of stacks up along those that we want to make sure we're considering in what the technologies are doing and what they're measuring. And to that extent further, really focusing on what we want these sensors to do and what the outcomes look like, which drives more of the technical specifications for things like that, as well as who's going to be paying for them, who pays for the development of the technologies, and then who will pay for or be incentivized to pay for sensors later on, which kind of goes to Megan's points.
The data systems group, we talked about the importance of integrating data sources. Like that's a real challenge, and people aren't just going to change what they're using. We need to be able to bring it together. We also talked about the importance of data security, and that as things are becoming more cloud-based, we really need to up our literacy, up our understanding. Like it's our responsibility to make sure that our data is secure and ensuring that. And then the other thing that I think we pulled out that might be missing from the research questions is just nuances around things like what is the important frequency of data that's being transmitted, and the technological implications and cost implications that has. You know, what is fast enough? What does real time actually mean? And how do we make those decisions to design good data systems and infrastructure?
I was in the policy and governance section, and surprisingly there wasn't so much interest. We only had 2 other members. So I hope that's a reflection of the facilitator. But I think the one takeaway was our questions are very lengthy, so we have to cut them down and make them a bit more concise. But I think also the general feedback was also that even though policy and governance, I think everybody would agree, is incredibly important and also can be a huge inhibitor to innovation or to adoption of innovation, it's a slow process to make policy and changes to governance, and that we're kind of at a very early stages in terms of like proof of concept and things like that. So like in terms of the organization and the prioritization of these questions, like questions about institutional capacity building, although that's really important, maybe there's other things that we need to focus on ahead of time in terms of some of the other research themes. And I think that's probably a good segue to what the working group will be focusing on. But leave it there.
And I also was a small group. I was the capacity building one, and a lot of the conversation really revolved around honestly affirming what the questions were here, and the idea that different capacity building is needed for whether it's for different staff members. So you might have staff who are out installing, you might have staff maintaining sensors, you have those who are looking at data, those who are responding, you have a management or government level, and so really making sure that we think about the different types of capacity building that's needed. And then also, when you go from a pilot to a scaling phase, sometimes that's within a nonprofit, but there's also a government that's always going to be involved in scaling at some level, whether it's feeding information to the government or whether it's transferring to the government. And with the capacity building, how do we think about whether we are creating demand for it or whether we're pushing? So it's that push-pull question that happens, and how we can really use capacity building concepts or training and to really incentivize or to think about that push-pull that can come as well. So just some thoughts from capacity building.
Thank you, everyone. So briefly, just next steps. So thank you so much for participating today and providing so much feedback. We're really looking forward to synthesizing it as the project management group, and we're looking forward to incorporating this feedback during November. And after that, we will have our next virtual call to discuss and share what we've been able to synthesize again for more iterative feedback. And we hope to finalize the research agenda by the end of December. So ambitious goals here, guys, but we're really thankful for your participation today, and we're looking forward to continued involvement. So if you would like to join the working group, here you can scan the QR code, or you can get in touch with one of us. So with that, thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference and safe travels home.
Go team. 3 minutes to spare. Well done.
Oh my, perfect timing, honestly.
And the third time. I mean, our group literally didn't even reach for all of it.
There's a lot there. Nobody wanted to cut my yeah. But I love that
How did I do presenting work?
I know you nailed it. I was really impressed. That's awesome. Okay, yeah. Just
Okay.
I appreciate it.
I can't believe it was like, what?